Ümit üzme aziz xalqim, ümit üzme ey ana yurt. Biz atlandık bu küreşke, o yıl taştek uyuşup. Allah verse bu nusretni, bizgilerimiz sep bulup. Zalimlarni yığlatgudek, Uğuz gibi küçlük bulup. Lepildeydi asminanda, göz çaknitip şu günü. Ay yıldızlık gök bayrağım, ey ana makam. Ay yıldızlık gök
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, welcome to a special episode of Talk is Turkestan. I have two very special guests with me, as you've seen in the ad. A lot of our followers love these two guys. They give us the ins and outs, all that little nitty-gritty about what's happening in China, whether it be general life, social media, propaganda, soft power, and all that. Anyways, without further ado, I'd like you to welcome to Talk is Turkestan's podcasts, my dear SerpentZA and Laowhy86.
Hey there, how's it going?
Nice to be here, guys.
Thank you so much for accepting this interview. Today is just going to be, as I mentioned before, just informal. We're going to have fun with it. It's a true honor for me because for me, even though you guys are so, I guess in some people's eyes, unpopular, I still regard you guys as underrated.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I just want to get into the questions today. First of all, just a little bit about you guys, how you guys started with your YouTube channels, and all the links to all their YouTube channels, whether it be ADV China Podcast, ADV China, Laowhy86, and SerpentZA's YouTube channel links are all in the description, guys. Make sure you follow, subscribe, support them on their Patreon as well. So guys, with your YouTube channels, how did you guys get started? And what was the turning point? And and where is your work going towards? What's going to happen?
Okay, well, fairly straightforward. I'll keep it as brief as possible. I went to China for a business trip in 2006. In February of 2006. And I loved it so much. It was so different to what I was expecting that I went home, I sold all my possessions, and I took a flight back there. I had no plans. I just got myself a tourist visa. I wanted to go and see if I could find work and stay there. And long story short, I went through a long process. I became homeless for a couple of days, even finally found my feet and found work and made a plan, started a life there. And I wanted to show people what I was experiencing because it's very different to what the outside world was thinking of China at the time. And so I started a YouTube channel to show specifically friends and family what it was all about because they were concerned about me and worried about me in China. So I wanted everyone to see. And people started to watch and ask me questions. Hey, what's it like to rent a house there? Is it easy to have a relationship there, et cetera, et cetera. So I just started to make videos and they became more and more popular. As far as a turning point is concerned, they reached a point where things just changed. The China that I'd fallen in love with and the China that I really enjoyed living in started to change for the worse. And the more I learned how to speak Chinese and the more I understood how China worked, the more I could see the very bad things that were being hidden just beneath the surface. And it got to a point where I just started to get attacked for even mild criticisms of Chinese society. And they even went after my family and after my wife and everything like that. And that's when I decided that, things had to change and I had to speak up about it.
Yeah, same here. I started YouTube. Basically, Winston was the first one to do it, and I was probably the second one, to be honest. That's how we came together and became friends and started all these channels together.
Yeah.
But long story short, very, very simple explanation is I wanted to show people back home that I wasn't in any danger. Living in China was obviously something that people from my small hometown thought was quite a big leap of faith to want to go so far away. So I wanted to show people that I was okay, and then again gathered an audience because there wasn't a whole lot of people out there doing what we were doing. But turning points, I was never under any pretense that like China was some sort of moral paragon. I always knew that China below the surface, especially the way the Communist Party of China operated, was definitely a nefarious government. But it was about the trajectory we saw going on. So yes, it comes from evil roots. It comes from, you know, how Chairman Mao started the whole Communist Party of China. But it was morphing into something where it looked like it was going to be an international player, and maybe play by some more moral rules, you know, adhere to global principles that we all, you know, hold dear. And unfortunately, under Xi Jinping's leadership is when Winston and I saw things really take a turn for the worse and just do that dynastical change that China does and start closing itself off again. So, you know, the writing was on the wall after we were making mostly positive content about China, but we were still getting demonized and threatened by the authorities. It was kind of, you know, time to leave, and maybe we wanted to start talking about actually the things that we saw that we couldn't talk about while we were in China.
Actually, some of the stuff that you were posting while you were even in China, it wasn't necessarily you were critical of the government. It was just, for example, like homeless people or the poverty. It was just things that, you know, wasn't being taken care of. And even that you were getting sort of, it was quite dangerous for you even to be critical of those things, where in the West, it's quite reasonable for us to complain about the roads or, you know, poverty in our own countries. Sure. Could you talk about the difference? Like, people don't seem to get the difference when we complain about our own local, state or federal governments as compared to when you talk about little things about, for example, how China couldn't deal with COVID, let alone keeping it a secret and locking it up.
Yeah, it's an us versus them mentality in China. And that's what the government teaches everybody, is that the outside world is always out to get China. That's kind of the message that comes through in school from as young as kindergarten all the way through your education. It's our China and their foreign type situation. So what happens is when you are hanging out with your Chinese friends like I used to do, and you're sitting around having a couple of drinks or just talking, they'll complain about the issues in China. It's totally fine. You hear that a lot. Chinese people do complain in their little social circles. But if a foreigner says something bad about China, what they deem as bad, in other words, just criticizes a legitimate issue, they take offense to that. And they, especially if you do it publicly, they will attack you because they say, it's kind of like my parents. I can say bad things about my parents, but you can't say bad things about my parents. That's their logic behind it. So if you say, hey, look, there's a problem with homelessness in China, they'll be like, how dare you as a foreigner criticize our China? You know, this is not your place. By the way, there's more homeless people in your country. And they love this whataboutism thing because there's a massive double standard going on. With the open Western press and the freedom of speech and so on, all the bad issues that you find in the USA, Australia, New Zealand, doesn't matter where in the world that has an open press, it's in the news. And the Chinese news loves to repeat all the bad things that are happening in the USA, for instance, on a daily basis in the newspapers, on the TV. So everyone in China knows all the bad things that happen in the West, but they don't know the bad things that happen within the borders of China. And even if they are aware of them, they're placated because all they see all day, every day is how bad it is overseas. So for them, it's like they will talk about your country all day, about how bad your country is. But if you mention one bad thing about China or criticize one problem in China, they get offended and they have a knee-jerk defensive reaction and go after you.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that people understand, your viewers understand, we're not talking about a foreigner going into China and then just living off of criticizing China. We're talking about doing 95% positive content and then, hey, look, this area, you know, should be cleaned up. There's gutter or there's oil like flowing down the sides of the gutters here. It's kind of disgusting. That one comment is enough to completely erase everything you've ever done. And that's a problem. That's not Chinese people's problem. That is a product of the government. It is this, like you said, this us versus them mentality that the government uses to their advantage. Because what you do is when you focus on the foreigners being the blame or other countries being worse than China, then all of the domestic problems within the country, the government has a scapegoat for. So then people are not paying attention. I mean, we saw like during there's a Bo Xilai trials. Bo Xilai was a contender for the throne of China, really. And obviously the Xi Jinping faction and the other factions that didn't want him in power made sure that he ended up getting arrested to take him out of power. But during that time, China didn't want people to focus on that. They didn't want to say, hey, look, there's internal struggles within the party.
Corruption in the party.
There's corruption in the party. So what they did was they allowed an exacerbated anti-Japan protest, as they do. So it was okay for Chinese people to go out in the streets and burn cars and flip them over and have huge, huge riots.
Smash Japanese restaurants.
You know, whether they were, you know, staffed by Chinese people or not. So it's this tool that the Chinese government uses to always divert blame, because the Chinese government's very paranoid that if any sort of blame is attached or attributed to the government, then that will be its downfall.
So what's it like working for the CIA?
Great paychecks, you know.
Still waiting for that fat check.
Yeah, I have to meet them underneath a tree in the park, you know, in a certain time when the sun is like, you know, shining.
And the coyotes, you hear.
We have to
coyotes.
do a whistle, a bird whistle.
Now, the jokes aside, so there's a huge campaign that the Chinese government, well, I should say a morphing of campaigns that the Chinese government does to talk about people that speak out against the Chinese government. Originally, it started with, oh, these guys are, if you speak out against the Chinese government, oh, these guys just don't understand China. You have to come to China to understand it. So if you're mildly critical, like from abroad, you'd be like, oh, they just don't understand because they've never been here. And it morphs all the time, to the point where the most outlandish was when they said that your friend from the UK was in the CIA. Yeah. He was literally a photographer. Yeah. And he was in the Hong Kong protests, and state media circled him. Yes. And he used him as an example of the CIA.
You have to understand that when the Chinese government, and let's just say the Chinese nationalists, when they accuse someone of doing something, it's because they are doing that exact thing.
We've noticed that. It's actually a thing.
So what they do is the Chinese government pays foreigners right now through the state media outlets like CGTN and stuff. They recruit foreigners and they pay them, and they take them on these trips, and they pay them to do propaganda, to say how good China is and how bad America and the other countries are. Because if you watch any of those guys, they constantly just keep talking trash about America and their home countries like the UK, but praise China all the time. So China does that. So when they see some people like us who are very critical of the Chinese government and certain aspects of Chinese society, they suspect that we must get paid because that's their methodology. That's what they do.
It's a two-pronged approach. I mean, here's the deal. We've never received funding from any organization whatsoever, unless you're talking about maybe some patrons that we have that support us, right? Yeah. And that is so confusing to a huge chunk of Chinese people, especially nationalists, I should say, that people would go and talk about human rights in particular, because that's, you asked previously, Arslan, you previously asked what direction our channels are going, and we like to focus on human rights and why things are they are. Yeah. And people in China, nationalists, they wouldn't understand why you would put your neck on the line to go do that. Why would you go speak out for people that have no voice? Because what do you get in the end? If you're not being funded by anyone, why would you do that?
Yeah,
that's dangerous.
It's very alien.
It's an alien concept. You can see that in the way that the Chinese Communist Party has made China the least charitable country in the world. You can see the statistics. It's very confusing for the average person. So the other aspect is that, you know, probably a good chunk of the Chinese government and their intelligence knows that we're not funded. And that, to them, it doesn't make sense. That could potentially be inspirational for other people, right? Yeah. Like, wow, these guys are such martyrs. They would go do that. So that is something they need to label us with. Yeah. So whether it's CIA or what are the other things they say? Oh, Falun Gong, NED,
ASP.
Yeah, we're all of these things apparently. Yeah. That's according to the Chinese government.
I'm a South African, by the way, so I'm not American. I'm not Australian. I'm nothing like that. Right? I do everything because I have a moral imperative to do it, and we do things together because we have a moral imperative to do it. So there's no chance that I'm connected to any of these things. By the way, and I think the Falun Gong are a bunch of fruitcakes and that jump around and think they can fly in the sky. That's fine. I respect their right to their beliefs and all of that, but I'm certainly not one of them. But they love to pin that on us. They like to say, "Oh, you must be Falun Gong. You must be."
Yeah, so there's no other explanation.
It's kind of hilarious when you look at it that way.
Yeah,
you know.
You guys have sort of covered this question as you've on the screen. But for our audience here, we've got a question by Ibrahim Sharif asking, why do you think China wants to spread its influence abroad, particularly in Africa and the rest of Asia?
That's a pretty big question, but it's also quite simple to answer. So there is this notion in the past that China was this peaceful power that just wanted to do its own thing. And actually, to be honest, it avoided a lot of confrontation because of that. Because of that designation, because of that image that they portrayed to the world. Hey, we're just this huge country over in Asia. We're going to accept foreign investment. If you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone, basically. And that whole idea that China is just sleeping and like eventually they'll wake up one day. Xi Jinping is the one that woke themselves up. He decided that under his leadership, that was going to be the time that China is going to be the world power again. And those ambitions, if you asked me 10 years ago if China had those ambitions, I would say no. And that's just simply changed. You don't, when you're a huge superpower that has global ambitions, you have to make allies. And when you don't have allies like China does, then you have to go force yourself on other countries. So you see, maybe you can talk about the Africa goal here.
Well, it's neo-colonialism.
Yeah.
That's what it is. You know, China wants and needs resources. And so what they're doing is they're going into Africa and they're taking advantage of specifically corrupt governments in Africa. And they offer them these infrastructure projects. They offer them this Belt and Road thing. They say, we're going to give you, and they go to the corrupt leaders, we'll just give you a whole bunch of cash. And then you give us the rights to mine or to take your forests or to take your fish or whatever it is. And they go in and they destroy the local environments in all these different countries. You know, me being African myself, I know, and I've got African friends that live in these countries. They're all very fed up. In the beginning, they think it's great because, oh, look, China's coming to build a school for us. China's coming to build a railway and all that. But what they don't realize is China's actually trapping them in debt because they don't do that for free. The school, the railroad, all that, your local African people, you actually are paying for that.
Not charity.
No, and they even ship in Chinese construction workers and stuff so that they don't even actually generate a lot of jobs. So it's just a crazy situation where they're taking, and whatever they give is just, it's not a free gift.
No.
You know, it's like, here, we're going to basically sell this gift to you and then take your gold and your
it's
minerals and your forests for your wood and all your wildlife.
And by the way, we're going to open a port here now.
Yeah. So it's really just a big bunch of nonsense where they're trying to court all these African countries and pull the wool over their eyes and say, look how great China is. Look how well we're doing things for you. But meanwhile, they're just destroying the land and destroying everything. And they'll move out when they're done and they'll leave it decimated and they won't care. It's very different. It's very different to the previous colonial forces. Any kind of colonization of Africa is a disaster and it's a bad thing. But, you know, China doesn't have a conscience. And a lot of the old British colonies and the Dutch colonies and the Portuguese colonies, etc., when they left, they, obviously grew a conscience somewhere along the lines. And so they send aid every year and they, send reparations and they do everything that they can to help these African countries that they took advantage of in the past. But China won't do that. China will leave it in a mess and won't care about it.
Sorry. So you guys talk a lot about Chinese propaganda and soft power, which are quite general terms, especially recently. What should people be looking out for? I know, Laowhy, you cover a lot of things that happen on TikTok, but what other trends are you seeing that people need to be careful of?
And soft power, like you said, is a very broad term. And honestly, if you see anything that is on the nose about supporting the Chinese government over another government, it's most likely propaganda. And it's not one of those things where like you used to see things like, oh, China lifted all these people out of poverty and stuff. It's definitely more slick. And that's why I cover the TikTok aspect. It's trying to gather it's trying to corral like the hearts and minds of the young generation that is very impressionable. And they do this for a reason. Their standard, it's very normal when you're in a Western country to criticize your own government, to criticize your own country. So they grew up in a system, an educational system, where they're constantly criticizing or taught to criticize their own leadership. So let's use America as an example. So then when you offer this alternative, so you've put instilled all these negative ideas and criticism and stuff in a child's head, which is fine if they grow organically through that path. But when you offer an alternative, and we're talking about a country now, China, that blocks off all of its internet so that its own domestic message is very different from what they would want to tell people abroad to influence them. They send out this other message to foreigners. What I've noticed is now there's a new trend where Chinese influencers that are doing propaganda will tell people everything you've heard about Chinese censorship is bullshit. Everything you've heard about Chinese blocking the internet and stuff is not true. We can use VPNs. We're allowed to see everything. Everything you're hearing is just propaganda from your own Western countries. So don't listen to anything. Our message is actually correct. And then the impressionable young people say, oh, I guess what I've learned about China's authoritarian dictatorship and all the censorship and stuff is not real. So then that message of propaganda that they previously may have rejected is now much more palatable, right? Oh, it's coming from a place of truth. I've been being fed lies all my life because the West is just scared of China's rise and stuff. And it's this vicious circle. I think you'd agree. Recently, we've been seeing a shift in propaganda where it's a lie about how free China is to counter the Western narrative.
I can give you a good analogy. If you lived in a neighborhood and there's a house on the corner and it's this beautiful house, it looks amazing from the outside. It's all gilded and it looks fantastic, but nobody ever is allowed to go into the house. Okay. You live in a house and you know all the problems inside your house. Maybe you've got a leaky faucet. Maybe, I don't know, you've got some dirty areas. It's not very good. Yeah, mold, whatever. There's trouble in your house. Maybe you've got a rabid dog in the backyard. Who knows? But you know all the problems in your house. It's not great. And you see this gilded house over there. And all you ever do is see someone every once in a while when you walk past, pop their head over the gate and say, you know what? My house here is so beautiful and so clean and so wonderful inside. Your house sucks, because you've invited them into your house. You invite them and they come into your house and they look and they say, oh, look, you got mold, you got this. But they never let you into their house. It's this beautiful gilded house and they just pop their head over the wall and say, everything's great inside here. Your house sucks. Maybe you start to believe them after a while. Meanwhile, inside their house is just filthy and disgusting and it's got dead bodies lying around. You just don't know. But
it's a crime scene.
All you ever see is this gilded house and this person that pops up telling you just how great it is inside there. And so unless you see it with your own eyes, you might start believing them.
Yeah.
And that's what China does. It's blocked off. So when they go out there and they put their propaganda to the world through TikTok and through YouTube and through Twitter and everything, from the outside looking in, all you ever see is the fluff piece propaganda. Look at these happy dancing minorities. It's always some random minority that's dancing for some reason. They love doing that. Look at these beautiful landscapes, which they've had to wait for a very specific day when there's no smog or anything to actually take these photos. Look at this wonderful tradition that we have here. Look at how great the infrastructure is. The people, they're being lifted out of poverty. And it all looks so fantastic from the outside. But if you've been into China and lived in China as long as we have, I lived in China for 14 years and I traveled around the entire country, and not by plane and by train and stuff, on a motorcycle. So I went to go through all the small villages. So did Seamilk. We get to see the real China. We get to see all the back rooms. We get to see the backyard. We get to see in the kitchen. We get to see in the bathroom. We get to see everything. You see that the outward projection image that they're putting out there is nonsense, It's just cherry picked. It's all the best little bits.
Yeah, never mind the beautiful scenery and stuff that's cherry picked. That's not as important. What's important is the meaningful conversations, dialogues we have with local people.
Absolutely.
When you find out that poverty alleviation, for example, is a huge farce by and large in a lot of these areas, and it just starts to weigh on you because like you have to consume the propaganda while living there.
Yeah.
But then when you leave and you actually take all these experiences with you and all the beautiful conversations and people that we've met. And you see what China's portraying right now and projecting to the rest of the world, it's too frustrating not to say anything.
It's so frustrating. I mean, we have so much video footage that we shot ourselves and the experiences that we had while we were in China. It's irrefutable what we have to say.
The difference is like we'll go to a country like Vietnam and clearly Vietnam is poorer than China, but it's not portraying itself as anything different, right? Vietnam is absolutely no bastion of freedom or anything, but the attitude that people we met recently when we went there was very different than the nationalism that's being pushed by China, because China's telling its own citizens that we are better and we deserve everything in the entire world, and the rest of the world it's their fault. Whereas a country like Vietnam, yes, it's poor, yes, it's run down and stuff, but the people are improving it and they're not blaming anyone else for that issue,
exactly.
Right.
It's different. It is. You see what you get, they tell you how it is and that's how it is. So China is really just putting on this very shiny facade with all of its soft power to mold the minds of people around the world into thinking a certain way about China and overlooking the very big issues that China has and the very awful human rights atrocities that they are committing, not only within their borders, but everywhere around the world right now. You've got to be very careful about what China is doing.
Yeah.
I mean, the mere fact that you guys cannot go back to China in itself is telling you something. As we sort of indirectly mentioned, these independent bloggers making unbiased reports, for example, about the Uyghurs and the camps and saying there's no genocide. Well, how come we don't get like one critical voice within the borders of China ever? That in itself is evidence. Yeah. So I've got a question from here. You guys have sort of covered this in your videos as well. You know, these military moves or war with Taiwan, how realistic is this? Is this just more talk from China, or is this really boiling over to something?
It would look like it's boiling over. I'm fairly positive on this issue. It's definitely blustering more than it would China towards Taiwan. The thing is, that would be, and ultimately it would be a huge failure for China. It would put the world into global turmoil over this, because the U.S. would have to come to Taiwan's aid. But that aside, even just a normal invasion of China would be Taiwan. I'm sorry, the real
don't
China.
Confuse
China invading Taiwan would be a huge bloody disaster, because if you got to think about this, there are millions and millions of Chinese soldiers that are actually only children, right? And I'll tell you what. If you send an only child, especially a boy from a Chinese family, over to go die in taking back Taiwan, you're going to have a hell of a lot of very, very upset families in China that their bloodline stopped, their future revenue sources stopped, and now their family is dead in the water, basically. It would cause immense unrest. And China knows that. So you see, like, for example, the C-17 plane from the U.S. just landed in to talk about vaccine donations. In China's red line, their red line was that U.S. military aircraft, if it ever lands on Taiwan, that we will send the PLA over to take Taiwan. Yeah. Guess what? They were dead silent.
Yeah, they didn't do it.
No, they didn't do it. They not only did they not do it, but they actually are more silent than usual, because the red line is perpetual to me. I feel like, yes, China, if they want to stop, there's a boy who cried wolf syndrome that's going on here and constantly threatening to take Taiwan, and actually getting the people in China very riled up about it, and then never delivering on that. There is a certain risk to that, but the risk of potentially causing mass amounts of social unrest within China with a Taiwan takeover definitely outweighs that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are your hopes for China? Do you see it getting better? Many people are saying, well, if Xi Jinping dies or he goes, things are going to get better.
No.
What do you say to that?
Absolutely not. I mean, that's a fantasy for the way
it depends who takes
works.
over.
No, it doesn't matter.
No, I mean,
the thing is, Xi Jinping's consolidated all the power into his faction. You'd probably get another mini Xi up there. Obviously, it's difficult to tell, but the way the Chinese Communist Party works, or at least the trajectory it's gone in, has shown. And again, people think that there's more unrest or something nowadays. There's not. I don't think the Chinese people are any more disenchanted than they were previously. Yes, there's a lot more reality on the ground that China's not participating on the international stage, but that's how soft power and propaganda works within the borders of China. They've told their people there's a reason that that's happening, and most people have bought it, right? So the future leadership of China, I don't think, is necessarily any better than what we currently have. And it's just I think it's a bit of an immature fantasy to think that one quick leader change is going to change the whole situation.
I mean, I disagree on a couple of aspects here. And I mean, that's why we get along so well, is because we don't just echo each other's thoughts. Look, as far as unrest in China, there has been an uptick. If you saw my recent video about the knife attacks, it's just crazy.
Aspects,
and it's really due to the fact that I think people have been promised so much by the Chinese government for so long, and they're reaching a point where none of these promises are really being fulfilled. It's reached a peak. You can definitely say that China has reached its peak and is now currently just kind of stably chugging along.
Yeah.
The economy is going down a little bit, or staying the same. It's not this meteoric rise that you saw a couple of years ago. So people were under the impression for a long time that things would just not stop growing, and that they would just keep making money, and that things would just keep going sky high, and you could just make money for nothing real easy and quick. And that's kind of stopped. And I think a lot of people are getting frustrated with that. And so they're starting to wake up a little bit to the fact that they've been either lied to or just misled by the government. So you're seeing that. As far as with Xi Jinping dying, I agree. with Matt that it wouldn't make a huge change overnight. But one thing that I think will make a change, because it's a fantasy to think that the CCP would ever step down. One thing that can make a change with China and has been proven to make a change in the past is to make the government lose face, but lose face in a big way, because they are a big bully and they're kind of standing there flexing their muscles the whole time saying, I'm the toughest person in the world. You know, I will kick your ass if you try to look at me sideways. If that bully were to get punched a few times and actually fall to the floor, they would become more humble. And this is something you notice a lot in Chinese society, is that when somebody loses face, and this goes for the government too, when they lose face, that's when they back down, and that's when they become more humble. So by pointing out that the Chinese government is not infallible, and pointing out that they make mistakes and making it abundantly clear, and allowing the Chinese population to see that the government has made mistakes, that's the best way to force any kind of change in China.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you've been following the Uyghur Tribunal.
Yeah, we have.
How do you think we could hold China accountable for these crimes? Now, SerpentZA, you know, being someone from South Africa, you know, things like boycotts did work to take down apartheid.
Yes.
Is this one of the ways? Is this going to be successful? What's the difference between what South Africa was, its strength, its influence back in its day, and now comparing that with China? Would the same strategy apply?
Look, sanctions can help a lot. You know, South Africa back in its heyday was a nuclear power. It was fairly strong. I grew up at the tail end of that. Apartheid was abolished when I was still very young. And the whole thing was that South Africa was very self-sufficient. I mean, a very rich country, a lot of gold and diamonds and all that kind of thing, and had everything that we needed. All the brands, like for instance, I grew up, we didn't have any international brands. We didn't have McDonald's or Starbucks or any of that kind of stuff. We had our own homegrown stuff in South Africa, like Wimpy and Spur and things like that. So everyone was kind of happy, but the constant international pressure, you know, like all the university students in America running around with their protests, Free Mandela and stuff like that, and specifically all the sanctions against South Africa helped eventually push change in the government. I think the difference is, though, is that the South African government, I don't know how to put this, but they realized that they had a bit of a conscience, and they were like, you know what, yes, we've obviously screwed up. There's no defending what we've done here. At least that's what I think. Could be wrong. Whereas in China, it's different. They're very belligerent. They will never be able to admit fault, you know, and that's face culture as well. Yeah, it's the face culture. That's the thing that where I don't think it'll work as well or as successfully as South Africa is, because all they can do is say, oh, those foreigners, right? But South Africa is such a diverse country. Even when it was ruled by a white majority, it was still made up of a huge mixture of white people from all over the world. So, you know, you had the Portuguese people there and Greek people, and you had, you know, like you name it. You had people from different cultures all kind of running the place. So it wasn't this like hegemony thing, you know, it wasn't just like, homogenous thing is what I meant. So you didn't just have one race with one goal and, you know, one xenophobic country set up like that, like the Chinese government is, because it's just the Han Chinese majority, and they have this foreigner versus China thing, whereas South Africa was a bit more inclusive when it came to being a part of the global world. I mean, don't forget, South African pilots flew in the Battle of Britain. South Africa helped during World War II in all these different places. Still very much a part of the whole world. But China has always been separate from that. So China's kind of got that going for it. So when the rest of the world says, you know, we're going to put sanctions against you, that's kind of what they're used to. They're like, yes, it's an us versus them thing. So I don't know. Kind
of plays into that.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll be that effective, but it would help.
Definitely economic downturn would help. Because again, it's this false promise idea. I just think that Chinese people have been conditioned within the CCP to, yes, they're pissed off. Yes, they're being mostly just apathetic, to be honest. But yes, there's discontent, but they can't do anything about it. Right. That's the difference, is they, unlike South Africa, where there was stark change and quick change, and a lot of people in South Africa got behind that movement. A lot of people in China probably wouldn't get behind that movement until their money's taken away, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that China said, we will have ultimate control. The Chinese government says, we'll have ultimate control over every aspect of your life, but you get to have money. When that element is gone, what is there left? I mean, it's kind of like, that's an argument against like atheism, for example, for a lot of people, is that if you're hollow, if you have no spiritual guidance, in this case with China, you have no material guidance anymore, then what are you believing in? You're believing in an authoritarian dictatorship that can't even deliver its most basic promises.
Yeah.
Hold on. I thought there was a 95% approval rate of Chinese people. What? Come on, stop your lies.
Yeah, I mean that whole 95% thing's a bunch of rubbish anyway. It's like an outdated. Well,
explain it.
It's an outdated Harvard study, and the way they did it was through sort of clandestine means. It's not an official polling of the public. And actually, the other statistic on that is that when it comes to dealing with local government, so the people you actually talk to as a person, the very satisfied rate is only 11.3% or something like that. So everyone is supposedly 95% satisfied with the Beijing government, so the central government, and they only see that on the TV or in the newspapers about how powerful they are. Oh, we're sending rockets to the moon. We're building this massive military. We're lifting people out of poverty. You read that every day, day in and day out, and you see all these fancy parades and stuff. And so you're like, yeah,
I can get behind that.
I approve of that.
But my local CCP official here, screw him.
Yeah, he's a piece of junk. Like, oh, I tried to get this permit and I wasn't allowed, or I got kicked off of my land or whatever. But that's not Beijing's fault. That's the local government's fault. They can't tie it together. It's the same bloody government.
What your listeners, I hope they understand, is that they are exactly the same thing. So when you sell the concept of this beautiful utopian government to the people that they'll never interact with, they don't realize that the dissatisfied people, that's 11%, right? 11% of people are very satisfied with their local government. The people that aren't satisfied, the vast majority that are not very satisfied with their local government, they don't understand that they are, in fact, dealing directly with Beijing. It's a one-party dictatorship. That's how it works. So it's this very confused thing that people have going on. But it's something to think about. If your listeners ever hear, for example, these Western YouTubers that are living in China and doing Chinese propaganda, if you hear them say the 95% satisfaction rate, that is a dog whistle that it is propaganda, because that is their favorite statistic, and you will never once hear them come back with the 11% statistic.
Well, then, if everyone's unhappy, where are all the uprisings?
So there are a lot
of asking you this question.
Yeah. There are a lot of uprisings, actually. It's not maybe to the extent of what you might see in like a war-torn nation or something like this, where there's a huge power vacuum. The uprisings are more in forms of, like, for example, the student protests we just saw in Nanjing in eastern China that I just covered. There are people, and we're talking about students here, that previously supported the Hong Kong police against the other student protesters, right? We're talking about a subset of people that thought until the last minute that they were free as Chinese citizens, that they did have freedom of speech. So what happened was the Chinese government, they tried to sneak in this law where basically it would make their bachelor's degree kind of a vocational degree, a blue-collar degree. And the reason they want to do that is because they want more working-aged blue-collar positions to continue being the world's factory. Now, that pissed them off. They got very upset, and they went out to go protest.
I'd be pissed off, too, if someone told me that my degree that I've been working 4 years for suddenly just useless.
Right.
It's like a community college.
Exactly. You would be pissed off, right? But the thing is, there was a fallacy. The Chinese government has told their people so many times, especially in their 12 pillars of socialism with Chinese characteristics, that one of them is democracy and free speech. When you lie to your citizens that much, you will have people that stand up and say, hey, actually, I can protest. Screw this degree. The government's scamming me. And the government, what do? They send in the SWAT team. They go brutally beat up everyone. They lock people up, right?
Well, yeah. I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm going to interrupt you if you don't mind. Sorry, I'll get you back on track in a minute. But what you said just reminded me of, you know how it's enshrined in the constitution in China that if you have a grievance, you can go to the Hall of the People in Beijing, and you're allowed to go and give your grievance. So when, this is about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, there was that massive peer-to-peer lending scheme crash because it was getting out of hand. In China, you get these trends, and the peer-to-peer lending schemes were now taking off. Everyone was doing it. And the Chinese government realized that this was a very bad thing because it was unstable and it could cause a massive economic collapse. So they overnight put in these regulations, which forced a lot of these peer-to-peer lending schemes to close. And they were all like pyramid schemes, right? So a lot of people had a lot of money in them. So when they closed, like the people that were running them took the money and ran. And so my wife, for instance, lost a huge amount of money, and all of her friends lost a lot of money. And during this time, a lot of these people that had lost this money, they wanted to go to the Hall of the People in Beijing to protest this, to go and bring this up, because it was the government rule that basically shut these companies down. So what the government was doing was it was going and intimidating anyone who was thinking about going there. And they were intimidating them through like really weird means. And I know because, the group that my wife was a part of, all these people were sharing their stories. And one guy, the police went to his boss and told his boss to make sure that he didn't leave the city to go to Beijing, and that the boss must fire him if he tried to leave, right? For instance, they also went to other people, the police made them sign a document to say that they will not go to Beijing. And if they do try to go to Beijing, they will be arrested. Some of them tried to go there and they got on some buses. The buses were stopped when they arrived at Beijing and they were not allowed to get out. So you see, that's how China works.
I can actually riff off of that. Yeah. When I was doing my social credit system video, a lot of people were under the impression that it's either like a credit system like the US has, like a credit card score, FICO score system, or it's some weird like Black Mirror type thing. And it's actually something completely different. When I was translating the documents, I actually got my hands on the government documents that the Chinese government used to talk about how you get points in the social credit system to rise through society in China and how you lose them. One of the ways you lose points is to go to Beijing and tell the Beijing government, and through the law, talk about your transgressions, or talk about like something that you want to be dealt with by the Beijing government. That's how you lose points.
So you lose points for going and bringing up your grievances, which is part of the Constitution.
Yes.
That's how you lose points.
Right.
Yeah.
Crazy. So anyway, there are uprisings. So anyway, to get back to that,
sorry about that.
There are uprisings within China. But they're not revolutions. They're not let's overthrow the central government. And that's the problem we have. They're I would say 9 times out of 10 are transgressions or are grievances against the local government. And unfortunately, what a lot of Chinese people don't understand is that is the central government, right? So you'll have, let's say, a local official, for example, one time we went to in Guizhou, he had raped and murdered a 14-year-old girl. Right. The people were very pissed off because he didn't get in trouble for it. He's a CCP official in a small town, and he gets away with whatever the hell he wants. Turns out a lot of evil people rise through the ranks of the CCP because they're power-hungry people that want to get away with disturbing things like that, right? Yeah. So when the people did that, they had a huge protest. It got quite out of hand. And guess what? It was quashed immediately. But that protest was not to overthrow the central government.
No, it was against that local official.
Right. So we have a situation where China used to, under the Jiang Zemin Hu Jintao era, what they would do is they would count the amount of uprisings throughout the country. Yeah. The majority of them, until fairly recently, would have been about property rights.
Yes.
So you have like the government is able to seize any land that they can. You can't own land in China. It's a 70-year lease. So the Chinese government can come in even before that 70-year lease is up and say, we want this land. And usually they will compensate the person.
Yeah, they compensate.
The problem with the compensation is that it is enough money a lot of times, but what happens is you lose your farmland, you don't get to stay in your village anymore, you lose your way of life, and you go get a crappy concrete box outside of some city. And we see these villages just stagnating, basically turning into ghettos because the people lost their agricultural way of life, right? So long story short, people will have protests about this. They'll even make makeshift like firework cannons and stuff and fight against the government thugs that come in and try to take their land. But anyway, they stopped counting how many uprisings there were. You just don't hear about them because China has this weird thing where they can control all of the information that comes in and out of China. So you might see a leaked WeChat video about an uprising or something, but you don't see the hundreds of other ones that have happened.
And it never makes the news.
It never, obviously.
I mean, look, personally, myself, I've witnessed 3 very big protests in China. Just
illegal protests.
Just straight off. And well, one of them is a legal one.
One of them is legal.
Yeah. But it happens often and it never makes the news. And that's how China wins, is because it stems the flow of information. If nobody, and it's weird, it's so compartmentalized. So when you have this I saw this huge protest again, and look, I'm not even counting those anti-Japanese protests. And stuff. That's different. I'm talking about protests because of real estate scams. And it's always got to do with money, it seems, most of the time. Sure. But when you see this huge thing, I'll talk to someone the next day who just lives in a different district. They would not have known about it. They don't know anything about it. No one knows because it's so well contained. You know what I mean? And that's how they stem the spread of information, because if China started to realize that, hey, just next door in that town over there was a huge protest because they were upset about the water quality or something, maybe I could start protesting, you see, and it could spread. But that's what they do, is they don't allow it to spread, so they contain it each time.
It's just very rare that you see a separatist movement. We did see one in Guangdong not that long ago. It was a proper separatist movement. It was a big one.
The democracy thing.
Yeah. That was a big one. And even old people were involved, which was kind of crazy. You don't usually see that. But long story short, the government's narrative is so strong and so coercive that the blame is rarely placed on Xi Jinping and the CCP. It's placed on local issues.
The next question I'm going to ask, I'm only asking you guys this because you guys are quite influential. There was a map that was sort of shared around showing that mainland China was West Taiwan.
Yeah.
You guys probably saw that. We Uyghurs have an issue with the name Xinjiang.
Right.
Because, so for example, say Tibet. Tibet is not called Tibet, right? Yeah. It's called Xizang.
Xizang,
yeah.
Yeah. You know, how am I going to say this? Like, don't you think it's important to call the name of certain areas by their name that they're supposed to? Like, even it's gotten so influential that even China now refers to Xizang as Tibet. If we're calling Xizang Tibet, why are we still sticking with the Xinjiang? I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying, generally in media, shouldn't there be a trend to sort of bring East Turkestan, or, you know, even refer to as Uyghur region, take out the Xinjiang, literally meaning new land, as a sort of, you know, rebuttal against China?
I think I can tell you why it happened, especially amongst Westerners like ourselves. We lived in China, right? And we are still, and as much as you want to say, we are still susceptible to Chinese propaganda in the way that Chinese works, right? Especially the language. If we're going to be communicating with people, that's what it's called in Mandarin. But it's a new issue, right? So Tibet's been something I heard about since I was a kid, right? And yes, those movements were successful. And to me, the go-to name for Tibet is not Xizang anymore, even though I would say that to a Chinese person. I think about it as Tibet, and Xinjiang is just, it's too new of an issue to where it hasn't been solidified even in our own minds yet, right? But with people like you, obviously you're going to make changes like this, and I mean, that should be a thing that should be spread around. The problem is that even talking about the Xinjiang issue, the East Turkestan issue, those things are, I think that most people think about that region synonymous with the name Xinjiang right now. To even get that dialogue started is a good thing.
But that's
you know what I mean?
What I was going to say is, from the point of view of recognition, if I was to go speak to any ordinary person, say, let's talk about East Turkestan, they wouldn't know what I was talking about. You know, I think it's
a tricky thing, right?
Because the name Xinjiang is now well known around the world, and so that's finally, that's why we talk about it. I agree with you that it should be called by its correct name, and hopefully we'll be able to rectify that in the future, God willing. You know. But that's just one of those things that we have to, you know, utilize what tools we have right now, and to spread awareness about something. We're just going to have to call it Xinjiang for now. But what we can do is start throwing in its real name as well.
I think when you talk about Xinjiang or East Turkestan, what you say is, you get this conversation started with Xinjiang, and you say actually, and then you can talk about the history. Actually, it would be called East Turkestan.
Yeah, so you could we're going to talk about Xinjiang, also known as.
It's something we could do a better job with as well. That we'll try.
Yeah, I'm only mentioning that because, you know, we got to kind of start somewhere. For example, I'm in the Middle East right now, and so there's like, they're talking about, should we call it the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf? You know, like even China, is it Indo-China Pacific, or is it, you know, like that sort of thing? And the more you talk about it, people will, you know, latch onto those names.
I agree.
Anyways, guys, thank you so much for taking your time out and joining me today. Do you guys have any last words? And again, for everyone watching, all the links to their channels, make sure you like, share, subscribe. One more thing that it just reminded me before I let you go, YouTube, you know, unsubscribing from each other's channels. Can we just talk a little bit about that, and then we'll sort of close it off. That's the last thing that we talk about.
Well, it's not really a nefarious thing, but YouTube does unsubscribe people from each other's channels. I don't think it has anything to do with China. It's more like it's just it's a glitch.
It's
a lot of people
glitch.
go through it.
You know, most people, you'll find people on all aspects. They'll be like, oh, they're doing it because I'm pro-China,
No,
or oh, they're doing it because I'm anti-China,
or whatever.
No, that's, as far as the unsubscribing thing is concerned, it's kind of site-wide. It happens to everyone.
It's annoying.
Okay.
There is a difference when it comes to promoting videos, though, because a lot of the pro-China content is actually being paid to be promoted.
Yeah, the Chinese government pays for AdWords.
We get those propaganda channels actually turning up as adverts on our videos
to combat our narrative.
So, with enough money behind it, they can sway the opinion. They also have their army of 50 Cent.
That's the huge disadvantage of us, is we have no funding from anything, right?
But yeah, the 50 Cent army will go and flag and downvote videos to try and push them down on the algorithm and boost and comment on the videos they want. So they've got that huge resources of, human resources, I could say. They've got
and money,
vast amount to go and send them out to do this kind of thing.
The AdWords campaign is something we can prove.
Yeah.
I mean, they took out actual ads on our videos.
Exactly. I wanted to just say something here before we wrap this up. When it comes to the way China's behaving, especially in East Turkestan, Xinjiang, it's appalling. And they've been given a free pass for so long by everyone, and it makes me mad, because when you see how the rest of the world treats any kind of situation that involves oppression, stifling religious beliefs, and the kind of awful things that we know are happening in Xinjiang and that have been happening. I've been hearing about these things in China. I think probably the first time I started to hear about anything happening in Xinjiang was around 2011, 2012, is when my Chinese colleagues were telling me and laughing about how they would shave the beards of the Uyghurs and force them to drink alcohol. And this was appalling to me.
Yeah, that was like an office joke.
Yeah, I was hearing this stuff around 2011, 2012, and I kind of dismissed it as that can't really be true, or, whatever. But it just kept building and building and building. It's just appalling to me that the Western world will focus on micro little problems about oppression, or about like speech, the way you talk, or you're not using someone's pronoun or whatever, and make huge things about it. Meanwhile, we've got these incredibly vicious, terrible things happening in Xinjiang, which should not be accepted by anyone. But for some reason, they're just kind of glossed over by the West so that they can focus on some other stupid little issue that's got no consequence at all. It makes me mad. We need more of a spotlight on this.
Yeah, I think I'll close by saying it was something that we avoided in the beginning. I'll tell you why we avoided it. In China, it's looked down upon if you were to be favorable about East Turkestan or Uyghurs in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
it's a lower caste of China, to the point where the Han, this is not against all Han people, but it's the conditioning that the government has led them to think in, is that Uyghur people are simultaneously not Chinese and then simultaneously owned by China,
and
right?
They're all thieves.
And they're all thieves. Of course, the stereotypes aside, you can't have both. You can't.
This always happens.
You can't simultaneously have a situation where the Chinese government claims ownership and says, you are part of our China. You can't do this. You can't do this. You can't have religious freedom. You can't wear your beard like this. You can't blah, blah, blah. Now you have to go to a re-education camp. Now you have to be separated from your family. Now you're forced sterilized. All these horrible atrocities. And at the same time, demonize them in society and say, actually, you're lower than us. You're just trash. Of course, there's going to be issues coming out of that. And it's something that we couldn't talk about previously. And it's something that we have quite a big passion for now, because we know Uyghur people. We know people, what they've gone through. We know that they had to keep their mouth shut and keep their head down. And we're now in a position where we can actually talk about it. So it's a situation that people need to focus more on if they actually do care about human rights and are not just bullshitting.
Yeah.
Again, guys, thank you guys so much. Before we go, did you want to plug anything? What can we expect from you guys? I've noticed you've moved your podcasts to Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah, join us on the podcast.
That's the best thing to.
We cover the soft power, China's soft power. We try to dismantle it and show you how it works. And it's a weekly thing. We keep up with all the latest news in China, and it's not just headline stuff. It's stuff that we are being fed directly from our contacts in China all the time.
Yeah.
So we can give a very unique insight into what's going on. So hopefully, if you have the time on Fridays, please join us.
Definitely.
On the podcast, 2 p.m. PT.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, guys. Laowhy86 and Winston, don't leave me. I'm going to say goodbye. I'm just going to close out the show, then I'll say a proper goodbye after the show. So don't leave the stream. Brothers and sisters, make sure you like, share, subscribe to this channel. Go and follow and support Laowhy86 and SerpentZA on their channels. And until next time, peace be upon you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ümit üzme aziz halkım, ümit üzme ey ana yurt. Biz atlandık bu güreşke, o yıl taştek uyuşup. Allah